Now that you've seen what you can do with One Speedlight, let me go ahead and break this down in an easy step-by-step process for you so that you can create some amazing portraits. Let's go ahead and break this down and let's cover todo el pedo. The first step is to go location scouting, and that is going to improve your composition and photos dramatically. And what you're looking for is colorful backgrounds and lights for bokeh opportunities. I find whenever I do night portraits, if I can find those two ingredients, colors and lights in the background, that makes my images pop, especially for night portraits. Now, if I'm in a situation where there are no lights or color, that's where I'm going to use multiple lights, maybe light up a background or maybe add a rim light. But for this video, we're keeping it simple. We're just using One Speedlight. So as you can see here, the location that I found, it was during Christmas time and we had an abundance of colors and bokeh opportunities. That's one of my favorite things to do when I'm doing my night portraits. Now, if it's not Christmas time or you don't have many colorful opportunities, try going downtown. You can never go wrong with that area because there's always going to be some type of lights and some type of color. The next step is to get your ambient exposure and camera settings locked in. The first one that I want to talk about is the ISO. Because we're doing night portraits, your ISO might have to fluctuate and it might need to go up depending on the location, depending on how bright it is. Now, the location that I was shooting at on this specific day during Christmas time, there was a lot of bright lights everywhere. So my ISO could have been anywhere between 100 and 400. But for most of my photographs, I was actually at ISO 100 and 125 for most of them. Now keep in mind, I'm able to keep that low ISO because of my aperture. Now the aperture, whenever I'm doing night portraits, this is a personal preference, is I love to use the bokeh lenses. So in this entire photo shoot, I was using the 85mm RF Canon f1.2, shooting at 1.2 the entire shoot. Now you might be thinking, well, Eli, I don't have a 1.2 lens. Do I have to have something like a 1.2? Absolutely not. Here I have a Sigma. This is usually my go-to bokeh lens when I'm shooting Sony. It's the f1.4, and it is a wonderful size compared to my Canon. So this is a fantastic option. And another lens that you can go with is the Nifty 50, the f1.8 for Canon or any other brand. Really what you're going for here is you're going for the higher focal lengths. Once again, that's my personal preference, things like an 85mm, a 105 or a 135. And you want to get to the lowest aperture you can get, preferably f1.8, 1.4, and if you can get a 1.2, then that's fantastic. So when it comes to the aperture, set your aperture to the lowest number you can get. Set your ISO to anywhere between 100 and 400. And the last ingredient is going to be that shutter speed. Now, when it comes to the shutter speed, keep in mind the lower that you bring that shutter speed, the more ambient you're going to let in. So that means the brighter the background is going to be. And the faster you increase that shutter speed, that means the darker the background is going to be. So this answer is going to be completely different depending on your location. So what you have to do essentially is get to your location and do an ambient exposure. Take a look at the background. How dark or bright do you want your background to be? Now this is going to be a controversial setting because usually when I do night portraits, I actually use shutter speeds like 1/30th of a second, 1/50th of a second, or a 50th of a second, I'm sorry, or a 60th, and once again a 30th. So when it comes to those shutter speeds, the reason why I like to go slow is that I would like to keep my ISO relatively low. Now the thing is that a lot of people freak out. They start thinking, well, Eli, aren't the images going to be blurry? Like those are slow shutter speeds. I'm using a high focal length lens. You know, what if I get camera shake? How are you using those slow shutter speeds? And there's a couple of reasons for that. I'm able to do it because one, my camera has in-body image stabilization. But more importantly, when you're using flash, the flash is going to freeze the subject. So as long as you're not going crazy with the camera, moving it around and purposely trying to get that blur, you should be fine. Because in all my times using night portrait photography and using those slow shutter speeds, I haven't had any issues when it's come to focus. If you're freaking out right now and you're like, Eli, I don't trust myself, then in that case, what you would need to do is instead of having those low ISOs, increase it to maybe 400, and that'll allow you to increase your shutter speed so that you don't have to worry about the camera shake. The next step is to add the speedlight for fill light. Because we have our ambient exposure in place, the subject is going to be completely dark, and now what we need to do is add the flash to add light onto the subject. Now what I love to use when it comes to night portraits are speed lights. Now you can definitely use a 200 watt strobe like an FJ200 or a Godox 80-200 or even an FJ400 or Godox 400, but I like to keep my lights portable and small when it comes to night portraits because it's dark. I don't want to be carrying a lot of heavy gear, and the speed lights are definitely have that versatility when it comes to power output. Usually when I'm doing night portraits, I'm shooting anywhere between power 3 and power 5. Now, one thing to consider when it comes to night portraits is when it comes to mounting them, let me go ahead and get my bracket here, is I love using the Godox bracket, or it's also called the, I think it's the Flashpoint Glow S2 bracket. Now I think it's called the Glow. And this is the bracket that I love to use when it comes to mounting my flash. This is usually my go-to because I usually use the flash off camera. So here I can then mount a Bowens mount modifier along with my speed lights. Now I usually use either like a beauty dish or a 36-inch octabox when it comes to this. Now, one of the most important things to consider when you're doing night portraits and you're using speed lights is that not all speed lights are the same. So if I look at this FJ80 Mark II, you'll see that it has a modeling light, which is really convenient because when it comes to doing night portraits, if you're in a situation where it gets too dark, you might not be able to focus. And during this photo shoot, that happened actually. So I had to use my FJ80 Mark II. Now, Westcott does have another speed light. Let me get this ready here. And this speed light, when it comes to using it with off-camera flash, because I use this speed light to begin, their modeling light is actually right in the front. So this is more for when you're doing events and so forth. But when I put it in this little Godox mount right here, you're not going to be able to get that preview, that modeling light when I'm shooting. So the issue that was happening for me is that I wasn't able to focus on the subject. So I ended up swapping out the speed lights because if I'm in a dark situation and my camera can't focus, some speed lights don't have the modeling lights right here on the flash head. So that's something to consider. Some of them don't even have it at all. So if you're using like a Canon flash or a Yongnuo, if I pronounce that correctly, sometimes they don't come with a modeling light. So that's something to consider if you're in the market for purchasing a speed light. I like the ones that already have the modeling light built in. Now, once I have my modifier, like I said, I usually go with a 24-inch or 36-inch octabox. I usually place this camera left or camera right, raise the bottom of the modifier about shoulder level, and then I tilt it down ever so slightly, and I have it in about Rembrandt position, and I might need to move it left and right ever so slightly to just get the lighting perfectly. One of the questions I get quite often is what was the power output and how can I figure that out easily? And it's a difficult question to answer because it depends. There's many factors. It's the distance of the modifier to the subject, what modifier are you using, are you feathering the light? So my best advice when it comes to the power output is to do a test shot. Once you have your ambient settings locked in, you add in your speed light, and usually I add my modifier about 4 feet away to 5 feet. And just do a test shot. I would set your power at 5, or if I shoot Godox, that would be 1/8. And then either go down or up depending on your preview and back of the camera. So there's no need to start off at power 9 because that's going to be way too much power. And just kind of compare the different shots. And what's good about night portraits is that when you're doing night portraits, is that more often than not, the power isn't going to change too much as long as you keep the distance the same. Because there is no sun kind of going in and out. There's no clouds. You know, when you're shooting high-speed sync in the sun, the settings tend to fluctuate each time. So it's a little bit easier when it comes to night portraits, in my opinion. And here is a recap of the final results. Make sure you do your location scouting and find some colorful backgrounds and some bokeh opportunities in the background. Then you want to get your ambient exposure. Set up your ISO anywhere between ISO 400. Get your aperture to a nice aperture to get some bokeh like f1.8, f4, 1.2. Try to shoot with those higher focal lengths like an 85mm, a 105, or a 135. And then you add in your flash with your speed light. Now when you add in your flash with your Speedlight, I like to use a medium-sized octabox, and I usually have it about 5 feet away from the subject. Tilt that light down, have the bottom of the modifier around shoulder level, and these are the results that you can get. If you all enjoyed this video, I'm gonna leave you all off with some more content to check out. Thank you guys for watching. You guys have a beautiful day, and I will see you on the next one.